Okay, so today I'm going to be reading The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. It was written in 1894, and just a little backstory on her. She was a United States author of short stories and novels, and she's now considered by some to have been a forerunner of the feminist authors of the 20th century. During this time period, women didn't have very many rights and were considered to just be the housewife. So I'm going to read the first paragraph just to get a prediction of what is going to happen. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. So right away, reading that her husband has died, I think this story is going to be a little somber. And then, as it says, she has heart trouble already, I am thinking maybe a foreshadow to her dying. So to read on. It was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed and half concealing. Her husband's friend, Richards, was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram. It had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. So at this point, I am picturing Josephine and Richard sitting down, Mrs. Mallard, and trying to tell her as easily as possible that her husband has been killed in a freak accident. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once, with sudden, wild abandonment, in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. So I'm thinking the news didn't take very well, as with most people it wouldn't. And then she just needs to be alone, just to gather her thoughts and just process what has happened. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. So at this time, I'm thinking she's just taking a deep breath, taking in the news that her husband has passed away, and just thinking of what is going to happen. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aquiver with the new spring life. The delicious breath of rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly, and countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. So at this time I'm a little confused, because it says new spring life, which makes me think happy, as at this time many things are coming to life, such as animals, the flowers are coming out, the grass. So I'm a little confused at this time, so I'm going to keep going. There are patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other in the west facing her window. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. So I think it's just now hitting her that she's going to be alone, that there isn't going to be anyone else around, and that her husband has passed. She was young, with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strain. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. It was now a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. So I'm thinking at this time she's thinking maybe how life is going to go on, and thinking that the outside world is still going on without her husband. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully, What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name. But she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. So at this point, I'm thinking she might have a heart attack coming on. As it said, she is fearful, and it's kind of subtle, and that is how heart attacks do come on. To keep going on. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white, slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it was over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. So, I'm a little confused. I'm either thinking she's saying free from the heartache or free from her husband. So, I'm going to keep going. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and gray and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely, and she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. So, what I was thinking was kind of true. She is looking forward to the future without her husband. So, to go on, there would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. And yet she had loved him, sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? So at this time, she's looking forward to the future of being alone, of being in control of her life, and what's going to happen. She kind of says she loved her husband, but didn't love how she felt he was in control. Free, body and soul, she kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. Go away. I'm not making myself ill. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through the open window. So now I'm going back to when she was looking through the window and she saw the spring and the animals, and that's making a little more sense to me. That she was actually looking at the life she will now have without her husband, and it's happy, and she's just happy to be in control. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her, spring days and summer days, and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. So, I think she's actually satisfied with her husband's death, which she might just be because at this time men were in control. So it makes sense for her to be happy and kind of getting a weight lifted off her shoulders. Someone was opening the front door with a latch key. It was Brentley Mallard who entered, a little travel-stained, composedly carrying his grip sack and umbrella. It had been far from the scene of the accident, and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. But Richard was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills. Well, the end of the story was a little surprising with him actually being alive, and I think the surprise killed her. But at the end it said that joy kills her, and I don't think it was joy. I think it was sadness over the fact that everything she was looking towards for the future was not going to happen anymore with her husband still by her side. So that is the end of the story.